And we're pleased to welcome back to the show, we're Brian and Jannelle, David Williams, who's a speaker, an evangelist, an itinerant preacher, and we're so glad to have him back on the show. Welcome back, David.
Thanks. And you got me smiling. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that song. And I think it's a good way to warm up to something, because this is one that's it's a sad one, but I think it's an important clarification. And let's just start for clarity's sake. When most people say pro-life, they're talking about abortion, and I'm sure you have strong opinions about that. Am I right?
Yep, I do. So, yeah, you're right. People say pro-life, and automatically our minds go to the issue of abortion. And I think that is an aspect of life. But I think for us as believers, we have to look at it even much broader than that. So the issue isn't just, babies or other lives. It really comes to God and what's God's perspective of life and how's he view life. And certainly God has a heart for unborn children. You know, God's the creator of them. They're made in his image and likeness. They have intrinsic value because of the fact that he created them, and that's where their dignity and worth comes from. And we certainly, as people of God, should be those that are defending life. But life, I think, is much more broader than that. And even when you look at just that one issue, we have to be a people that, yes, we stand up for the unborn, but then we don't forget that the value of life doesn't stop there. So even if you just stay in that one arena that people would say the abortion arena, we don't just stand up and say we want the life of the baby, which we do. But we also realize there are other lives that are there that are very valuable and that matter to God. The life of the mom and the life of the dad, their lives matter to God. They, too, are created in the image of God. And, yes, that image has been marred by sin, but the image of God is still there, and it gives them great dignity and great value. So we don't just speak up for the child or even want to reach them for the sake of the child. We want to reach them because their lives matter, and they are precious and valuable to God, and we want to come alongside of them and show God's care to them. And even more than that, when we look at even just the issue of the unborn baby or the preborn baby, we don't just want to see babies born as Christians and born into a cycle of sin and seeing things just keep reverberating from one generation to the next. What we want to see is babies born, but babies born to moms and dads who have an encounter with the author of life, who are being transformed themselves, who can then begin to raise this baby up in the fear and in the admonition of the Lord, because we want to see lives transform. We want to see families transform. We want to see communities transform. So, yeah, it goes to us, valuing that life for what it is, created in the image of God, but then realizing that lives are so valuable that Jesus came into the world, that God would actually leave from heaven and he would come in the image of sinful flesh, though he was without sin, and come into the world to rescue us. And that's what we want to see. And then even on the back end of that, we can't just get so caught up in the baby, that when there is an abortion decision, God still even cares for the men and women who have committed acts that are heinous, that are wicked, that are evil, but God cares for them. Yeah. And he longs for their life to receive his mercy and to be transformed. So as believers, we can't I think sometimes we can almost we hear pro-life and it becomes political, and then we just think of one aspect of it. But God is a God who cares about life, much more broadly and fully than we do. And as believers, we do. I heard you, Brian, just say, even as you're talking about COVID, the nuances of it, like we have to step into the nuances of it, not taking sides when it comes to the different individuals or parties, but we take the side of God and what's God's heart. And so it's a heart of justice, but it's a heart of mercy. It's a heart of love. It's a heart of truth. It's a heart that wants to see transformation. And we're the ones who can step into that space with this message he's given us of the gospel of Christ.
That's right. Joining us by phone, David Williams, speaker and evangelist, itinerant preacher, and a regular contributor to the morning show here. He's talking about what it means to be pro-life and very clearly talked about how our first blush reaction as Christians, that means that we want to protect the unborn, which is a righteous, godly thing to protect.
Right.
But David, you were rightly reminding us about how that extends beyond the womb And I think people intellectually agree with that concept. I haven't met a Christian that goes, no, I don't care about lives when they're born. I only care about them in the womb. No one says that. And yet there's tension here. So where do we find the tension points for truly living out a pro-life ethic in everything we see?
I think in some of the incidents that we've seen in our country, over the past few months, it's dealt with some of the racial issues. Because what I see even being kind of, and sometimes I don't like using the label pro-life because then it just, relegates to, kind of the abortion arena. But being in that arena, I see things like this sometimes. I see people who will say, we care about the babies and we care about black babies. And yet when there's instances when there's injustice that are done to black men and women out on the streets, it's almost as if they're silenced. And it's like this black baby in the womb created in the image of God is now grown up. And even if they have made some choices that maybe you don't like, does their life still have value? Does their life still have dignity? Is their life still worth protecting? When we see communities that have been impacted by, things that have brought a lot of hurt and pain as a believer, aren't we called to care? Aren't we called to speak up? Aren't we called to be involved? Is our heart to be moved? And so it's almost like that continuum of it has to continue throughout all of life. And so we have these issues at times that whether it's abortion or racism, you look at it, it's like what causes both of them? What causes, the baby's life to not be valued? Because we fail to see that the baby is created in the image of God. And because of that, that baby has intrinsic value, worth, and dignity. Well, what causes racism and what causes people to be devalued because of their color? Because we don't rightly see that they are created in the image of God. And I think in the world that we live in now, there's almost, the church is in some regards, we've become irrelevant when it comes to issues that are happening out in society. And I think some of it is because of even the history of our country, our nation. We have this enmeshment of a country that was founded on biblical principles, a country that has this godly heritage, but yet at the same time we have this legacy of slavery. And so how do you mesh those two things together? So if the Christian viewpoint would have us viewing people as created in the image of God, but yet there were millions of people in this country at one time were treated as if they were less than human. They weren't given the basic rights. And we as a church, in some regards, we haven't even acknowledged the fact that that is true. And we still live as if we're, divided when it comes to color. So, back then, the gospel could be given to slaves, but yet you didn't see them as people. And if they received the gospel, they weren't maybe even seen to be your brother or sister in Christ in a way that they would be a unification and a reconciliation. And we've seen that continue throughout, history, where there's all these different things, and we still see these different tiers. And so I think for us to really have a pro-life ethic, then we got to see life the way that God sees life. That we got to be willing to speak up for injustice wherever injustice happens, whether it happens in the womb or whether it happens out on the street. And so we got to be true to what God's called us to, and we got to be willing to step into those spaces and places and to minister Christ. And when we do that, we don't even take side. Some people will say, well, whose side do I take? Is it Black Lives Matter or is it Blue Lives Matter? For us as the Christian, it's all lives matter. I said something to some college students that some people might think is controversial right now. So what Derek Chauvin, when he was on the neck of George Floyd for those 9 minutes, that's uncalled for. That's just an evil, wicked, heinous disregard for life in that instance. And so, we should be longing when we see things like that for justice. But as Christians, my heart just doesn't stop there. Because also in that, so I'm hurting. I'm longing for a family, a community, which I'm a part of according to the flesh that has been affected. And so I want to see ministry to that. But at the same time, as a believer in Christ, I want to see ministry to Derek Chauvin. I want to see mercy administered to him.
That's hard to do.
Yeah, there should be just. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's hard to do, but you're right. If we truly believe in a pro-life ethic, God has value in his life as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so his life matters. So let's say if I were put into wherever he is now, And I just looked at my life according to the color of my skin. That could cause me to be very angry and say, here's a guy who probably doesn't like me because of the skin color I am. But no, I have to look at his life the way that God looks at him. He's created in the image of God. And no matter what he did, Jesus Christ came to die for him. He came to shed his blood for him. And so in that, I should be longing for the mercy of God to invade his life and be willing to administer that mercy. And so whose side am I taking on this? I'm taking the side of the Lord. And I want to minister to a community that's broken, to a family that's hurting. I want to speak out against things that have been wrong. And yet at the same time, I want to minister mercy even to wrongdoers because, in fact, God has done that to me. Go back to the first issue we were talking about with abortion. I mean, I'm a man on the phone who's talking to you who was complicit in the death of my own child. Something wicked, something evil, something heinous. And I thank God for his truth, but I thank God for his grace and his ministry to me. And so we need to step into these places remembering who we represent. We're Christ's ambassadors. And so we're not taking sides, whether it's politically or racially. I'm taking God's side. And I want to see all those involved ministered to by the Lord, and how might you want to use me to do that?
Yeah, excellent stuff. David Williams, again, speaker, evangelist, itinerant preacher, and regular contributor to this here show. David, how can folks get connected to you and your ministry work?
They can go to my website, davidwilliamsspeaks.com, or they can find me on Facebook at David Williams Speaks.
Again, davidwilliamsspeaks.com. Thanks again, my friend. I always look forward to having you on the show. Can't wait to have you back again soon, okay?
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Jannelle.
Thanks,
you guys have
David.
a great morning.